Create a compelling 59-minute YouTube documentary on the French Revolution, blending dramatic narration, archival paintings, animated maps, and AI-generated visuals. On the eve of 1789, France was a titan of European culture. Yet, beneath this glittering facade, a storm of social injustice, intellectual awakening, economic ruin, and political failure was gathering, ready to unleash a torrent of change that would reshape the world. At the heart of the kingdom's troubles lay the Ancien Régime, a rigid system of social inequality. French society was divided into three estates. The first estate, the clergy, and the second, the nobility, comprised less than 2% of the population, but controlled immense wealth and were exempt from taxation. The entire burden of funding the state fell upon the third estate. This massive group, from peasants to the rising middle class, paid nearly all the taxes while being denied any voice in government. This glaring disparity bred a deep and simmering resentment, a sense that the very structure of society was fundamentally unjust. While the Third Estate groaned under this weight, a revolution of the mind was underway. The Age of Enlightenment centered in Paris, championed radical new ideas. In bustling salons and through widely read pamphlets, thinkers like Voltaire and Rousseau questioned the divine right of kings. They advocated for popular sovereignty, the idea that a government's authority comes from its people. They spoke of liberty, equality, and inalienable rights. These ideas filtered down through society, providing a powerful language for the grievances of the common people. The old order was no longer seen as divinely ordained, but as an unjust construct that could be dismantled. This intellectual ferment collided with a catastrophic economic crisis. The French crown was on the verge of bankruptcy, its treasury drained by extravagant spending and costly wars, including its support for the American Revolution. Compounding the crisis, a series of poor harvests sent the price of bread, the staple food of the masses, skyrocketing. While the royal court lived in luxury, ordinary Parisians spent most of their income just to avoid starvation. Hunger turned to anger and bread riots erupted across the country. The government, paralyzed by debt and unable to tax the privileged, seemed powerless to stop the slide into chaos. At the center of this maelstrom was a monarch ill-equipped for the crisis, King Louis XVI. Well-intentioned but indecisive, Louis failed to implement the sweeping financial reforms that were desperately needed, consistently thwarted by the powerful nobility. The king and his widely despised queen, Marie Antoinette, became symbols of the monarchy's detachment from its people's suffering. His inability to lead or forge a compromise created a power vacuum. The foundations of the old world were cracking, and a violent, uncertain age was about to be born. The French Revolution was not a single event, but a cascade of seismic shocks that shattered the old world. To understand its trajectory, we must trace the key moments that defined its violent, chaotic, and ultimately transformative course. It begins with a symbol. July 14, 1789. The air in Paris is thick with fear and revolutionary fervor. The people, desperate for weapons and gunpowder to defend themselves against a feared royalist crackdown, turn their eyes to a formidable medieval fortress dominating the city skyline, the Bastille. More than just a prison, it was the physical embodiment of the monarchy's absolute and arbitrary power. An angry mob, a mix of artisans, shopkeepers, and laborers, storms its walls. The battle is bloody and brief, but its significance is monumental. The fall of the Bastille is not just the capture of a building, it is the collapse of a symbol of tyranny. This single act of defiance signals to the king and the world that the people of France will no longer be subjugated. The revolution has found its fire. In the wake of this popular uprising, the newly formed National Assembly sought to build a new France on a foundation of ideas. On August 26, 1789, they produced one of history's most influential documents, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. Drawing heavily from the Enlightenment ideals of liberty and reason, it proclaimed that men are born and remain free and equal in rights. It enshrined principles of liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression, declaring that sovereignty resided not with the king, but with the nation itself. This was a radical break from the past, a blueprint for a society based on merit and law, not birthright and privilege. But the path from ideals to reality proved to be treacherous. As France found itself at war with neighboring monarchies and torn apart by internal counter-revolution, paranoia took hold. The revolution entered its most radical and bloody phase, the Reign of Terror. From 1793 to 1794, the Committee of Public Safety, led by the austere and uncompromising Maximilien Robespierre, sought to purify the nation of its enemies. The guillotine, the so-called national razor, became the chilling symbol of this period. It fell upon King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette, but its victims numbered in the tens of thousands, from aristocrats and clergy to ordinary citizens accused of insufficient revolutionary zeal. It was a time when virtue was enforced by terror, and the revolution began to devour its own children. The bloodshed of the terror could not last. After Robespierre himself met his end at the guillotine, France stumbled through years of political instability under a weak government known as the Directory. The nation, exhausted by a decade of chaos, yearned for order and a strong leader. Into this vacuum stepped a figure of immense ambition and military genius, Napoleon Bonaparte. A young general who had won dazzling victories for the Republic, Napoleon saw his opportunity. In the coup d'état of 18 Brumaire, 1799, he seized power, effectively ending the revolutionary experiment in democracy. As first consul and later emperor, he would consolidate many of the revolution's changes, like legal equality, while simultaneously imposing an authoritarian rule that stretched across Europe. The age of revolution was over. The age of Napoleon had begun. Highlight iconic figures like Robespierre, Marie Antoinette, and revolutionary leaders. To truly understand the French Revolution, we must first immerse ourselves in its visual spectacle. This was not a quiet affair of ink and paper alone. It was a visceral, public, and often terrifying drama played out on the streets of Paris. The city itself became a living stage, its air thick with the scent of gunpowder, bread, and anticipation. Every corner buzzed with a raw, electric energy. Crowds surged through the narrow cobblestone alleys, their faces a mixture of hope, fury, and fear. In the cafes, intellectuals and artisans debated the very nature of man and government, their words fueling the fire outside. Pamphlets, fresh off the press, passed from hand to hand, spreading radical ideas like wildfire, arguing for a world turned upside down. This was a society on the brink, a sensory overload of sight and sound where the old order was visibly, violently, coming apart at the seams. And at the heart of this spectacle stood its most terrifying and iconic symbol, the guillotine. Promoted as a humane and egalitarian instrument of death, it quickly became the emblem of the Reign of Terror. Dr. Joseph Ignace Guillotin's invention, intended to make execution swift and painless for all classes, was transformed into a political weapon, a relentless engine of purification. Public executions became ritualized theater. Thousands would gather in the Place de la Révolution, a grim festival of civic vengeance. The rhythmic fall of the blade was a constant, chilling reminder of the revolution's uncompromising power. It was a symbol of brutal equality, where the head of a king and the head of a commoner could meet the same fate. Its presence dominated the Parisian skyline and the European imagination, a stark visualization of how cheaply life was held in the pursuit of a perfect, virtuous republic. Yet away from the blood and chaos of the streets, another kind of revolution was unfolding. Inside the halls of the National Assembly, the battle was one of words and ideas. Here, the representatives of the people, having sworn their famous tennis court oath not to relent until a constitution was established, were forging a new nation from first principles. The air crackled not with gunpowder, but with intellectual fervor. Fiery speeches echoed through the chamber as delegates debated the fundamental rights of man, the limits of power, and the very definition of citizenship. It was here that the old world of privilege was dismantled, decree by decree. And it was here that one of history's most important documents was born, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. This was the philosophical soul of the revolution, a radical assertion that rights were universal, that sovereignty resided with the people, and that all citizens were equal before the law. A new nation required new symbols. The fleur-de-lis of the monarchy and the crucifix of the church were torn down, replaced by a powerful new trinity of images. The most enduring was the tricolor flag, a fusion of the red and blue of Paris with the white of the Bourbon monarchy, symbolizing the new unity of king and people, and later, the Republic alone. The simple red Phrygian cap, modeled on the headwear of freed slaves in ancient Rome, became a ubiquitous symbol of liberty. And from these, a national personification emerged. Marianne, she was the embodiment of the Republic itself, strong, defiant, leading her people forward, the broken chains of tyranny scattered at her feet. These weren't just decorations, they were a new visual language of loyalty, a way for ordinary people to physically wear their allegiance to the revolution and its ideals. The ultimate effect of this ideological and visual upheaval was the complete reshaping of France. The revolution was not a reform, it was a demolition. It systematically dismantled the Ancien Régime, the centuries-old framework of monarchy, aristocracy, and church. The fall of the Bastille was the first crack in the foundation. The execution of King Louis XVI was the final, irrevocable act that severed France from its royalist past. The vast landholdings of the church were seized, and a new, secular state began to emerge. Even time itself was remade with a new revolutionary calendar that wiped away saints' days and religious holidays. France was reimagined as a nation of 83 uniform departments, erasing ancient provincial loyalties in favor of a single unified French identity. The nation was no longer the property of a king, it was the collective possession of its citizens. But the shockwaves of this transformation could not be contained within France's borders. The principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity became France's most potent export. Monarchs across Europe watched in horror as this revolutionary plague threatened to infect their own populations. The ensuing wars, first defensive, then expansionist under Napoleon, carried these ideas across the continent on the tips of bayonets. The revolution inspired dreamers and radicals worldwide. In the French colony of Saint-Domingue, enslaved people took the Declaration of the Rights of Man at its word, leading to the Haitian Revolution and the creation of the world's first Black Republic. From Poland to Ireland to the burgeoning republics of Latin America, the French experiment served as both a blueprint and a cautionary tale for those struggling against oppression. The legacy of the French Revolution is written into the fabric of our modern world. Its central tenets, once radical, are now the bedrock of democratic societies everywhere. The call for liberté, égalité, fraternité echoes in the chambers of the United Nations and in the articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The concept that a government's legitimacy comes from the consent of the governed is the foundation of modern democracy. Every time a citizen casts a vote, every time a protester demands justice, every time a nation drafts a constitution to protect the rights of its people, they are continuing the conversation that began in the streets and assemblies of revolutionary Paris. Though its path was fraught with terror, chaos, and contradiction, the French Revolution remains a watershed moment in human history. It demonstrated that the world could be fundamentally remade, that the chains of tradition could be broken, and that the power to shape destiny could belong to the people. Its story is a dramatic, educational, and enduring testament to the timeless, turbulent, and unending struggle for human freedom.